Okay. Well, I just want to walk you guys through 7 principles. This is not just like what Deborah and I did. And in many ways, I think I can share more of what I wish we had not done or wish we would have done. But certainly now that our kids are 21 and 18, I feel a little more ready to even talk about raising teenagers because it's been touch and go. And there's still moments, right? But I do think that some of these principles ripped right from the scriptures, but also people giving us wise advice and things that we saw work in our own home has been really helpful. The first kind of thing I want you to think about, though, is what are you trying to accomplish with your child, your young adult? What do you want them to grow up to become? Because a lot of times we make decisions based on, you would look at their life and think, oh, you're raising this little one to be a professional dancer or to be a professional athlete or to be, an accountant or to be happy. And those all could be very valuable and meaningful things. The challenge with that, though, is that's more American dream and not necessarily kingdom oriented. So to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, that's in the Constitution, but that's not actually what we're called to do. And so somewhere early on, Deborah and I really worked hard to help our children grow up to become people who love Jesus. That was the most important thing to us. And knowing that out of that could be all those other things I just described, right? But I knew that if we could help them learn to hear God's voice and make decisions based on God's word and the way he wants us to live, that they would be in a good place, right? So let me just read this cool passage of scripture. It's one of the first things that God says about parenting. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It says this, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." And so you can sounds like all the time. That's right. And what's interesting is this is pre-pandemic. We did the math. Your children, especially when they're little, will be in the car with you more in a month than they will be with like the kids workers here at church over the course of a year. I mean, you think about it, it's just about an hour a week, and there's weeks you don't necessarily make it. It's amazing. If you outsource all of your spiritual investment in the children, in the church volunteers, you're missing a big opportunity, right? And you're not able to actually pull this off, just like what you were pointing out all the time. Talk about it when you sit at home, talk about it when you're on the road, talk about it when you lie down, talk about it when you get up. It's us as followers of Jesus trying to help our children become followers of Jesus. Now, what typically happens with a lot of kids is they get it really young, and then they go to middle school, and then they have friends that don't get it. And then you see all the sorts of temptations and confusion that comes with just being hormonal in middle school and high school. But the beauty is if you can instill enough in them, and knowing you guys here, I know that's been your heart all along, it's amazing how they'll come back. But they have to make that decision for themselves. So that's where the next workshop we'll do is parenting children. Like, how do we get them to start following Jesus and living that out? In many ways, this is kind of about helping them make it their own, right? I don't know your story. My story was one in which I came to faith at 10, but I really started following Jesus when I was 17. I think at 10, I just went to the front of the church so I could get baptized and not go to hell. It was more like fire insurance. And then at 17, I actually developed a relationship with God. And I've seen that happen even in my own kids, this young faith that fell away and then coming back. That's not everyone's story. My wife's story is she came to follow Jesus at 6 and has never stopped, but she's unique in more than just that way, but in that way in particular. But what we see here happening is this importance of passing on our faith from generation to generation. It's not the priests, it's not the rabbis, even in this story, it's the parents. No one will have more opportunities to impact your teenagers than you do. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. your kids may or may not have been dedicated here at Gateway, but the parent-baby dedication, there's two things we talk about. So those are the first two. We'll just start from the basics because you got to remember as a teenager that they need the same thing and you need the same thing. And the first is you won't be a perfect parent. So just take all those expectations of I have to do this right or else it will mess everything up and just let it go. All right. God knows you're not going to be perfect. He's full of grace and mercy. He will fill in the gaps. He will bring other people into your children's life to help them follow him, to grow in him. And the intent is not to hold you up to some kind of impossible standard, but to encourage you to be real about your relationship with God, to put things in your life that challenge you to grow in your own relationship with him. One of the turning points, I think, for my daughter and her kind of coming back to faith was when I started going through recovery and started learning to say I was sorry, started working on my short temper. Like, I think her seeing me taking my faith seriously, owning the fact that I'm broken and messed up and I'm just a work in progress, and I don't want her to, go through the same things that I went through, and even seeing some of the same genealogical struggles that have been passed from generation to generation manifesting in her. That was, I think, a real helpful season in her life. By trying to act like I had it all together, which wasn't what I was doing before then, but I also wasn't as open with her. I feel like that was a big switcheroo in her life. The second thing that we talk about the parent-baby dedication is you are not alone. Raising children is not easy. And to have a church family, to be a part of a community life group, having other people who are going through this at the same time to tell you you're not crazy, to help you in the situations you might find yourself. And also, here was another huge breakthrough for my kids. It was when the kids really started to get involved with youth group, and we made them stay involved in youth group. They didn't necessarily want that. I didn't want that as a kid. I remember I think it was about fifth, sixth grade, we'd walk in the front door of the church. My parents would go off to the left for their Sunday school class, and I would go out the back door and find my buddy Jimmy, who had a trampoline, right? I did not want to be there. I would try to pretend to be sick. They'd still make me go. This is well before the pandemic, And so what was happening in that situation, I think for me, and I think even in our kids, there's this weird thing that happens in middle school where their eyes are kind of open to the fact you are no longer their hero. It's hard. They're who they want to be around is their friends, and that's the voice that's loudest in their life. So if you can surround them with friends who actually love Jesus, and even 20-year-olds who love Jesus, because they still look up to 20-year-olds, maybe not to whatever age you are, 30, 40 years old, but that was a big game changer. I think for us, once Ricky got here, and we've had others, John Ing was helping with the students before, volunteers helping with the kids even before that. But going on mission trips, going to camp, going to youth group, like take advantage of those opportunities because you've got other people speaking into their life. But I was sitting in this room that our daughter was going through this exercise. They were asking the kids to just pray and to ask God to speak to them. And she felt like God spoke to her. Like that was kind of a moment for her when she felt like, wow, this is real. There is a God. And maybe what I used to believe is more real than I thought. But that would not have happened had she not been in that space. Now, my wife, Deborah, could tell you, and we'll, share as openly as you want us to, we weren't always on the same page when it comes to kids in their teen years, especially. Because my parents made me do things, and eventually it worked for me. Her parents never had to make her do anything. And you want your kids to be more like my wife, and in some ways our son was far more compliant and would do whatever we told him to do. And he went on a mission trip every single year. He went to camp every single year. He went to youth group every single Sunday. Our daughter fought it almost every single week. And so in some seasons, she was in the auditorium. She still had to go. We don't let you skip school. So you don't get to skip church, and we don't want to equate school and church, but we also want church to be just as important, the relationship with God, as learning math and science and all of that. But there was a season, and we never made her go to camp. We never made her go on mission trips, but we did eventually come to the conclusion she really does need to be in youth group. And in some ways, I think she was at a disadvantage because the alternative was listening to her dad talk. And so I think that doesn't help her either. She needed to hear other people talk about Jesus besides her parents. So you are not alone. Take advantage of what we do. What's cool about Trevi, though, is she decided to go on 2 mission trips. She decided to go to camp. Like, she came around and made that choice. And that was a really, beautiful thing. And God did some amazing things in those moments. Okay, so here's number 3. God gave this child to you because the best version of you is what he or she needs. So anytime you feel overwhelmed and you're not really sure how you got into this or how you got this kid, just know God has entrusted that one to you because he knows what's best. There's it's become one of my favorite passages. Acts 17, 26 and 27 says this: God began by making one person, and from him came all the different people who live everywhere in the world. God decided exactly when and where they must live. He did that so that they might look for him and perhaps find him, though he is not far from any of us. So it's this amazing thought that God put us in the exact time in history and place on this planet, and in the exact family that is giving us the best opportunity to say yes to him. It's a really remarkable thing. And when you hold on to that, when it's a very difficult day and that, teenager is acting just like a really bad teenager can do, holding on to, God, you've given me this child, help me love this child the way you want me to love this child, and I need your help, right? And one thing that I think for us that started to shift was kind of a game changer. We were kind of joking about, it's really fun once you can leave the house, once they're old enough and they can watch themselves and watch their brothers or sisters. And when we'd leave the house, kids were about middle school age, we'd tell Trevi to watch her big brother, and we'd tell the big brother to watch her, just to make sure all the bases were covered. And a lot of times our first kind of leaving the house and letting them be alone was just walking around the neighborhood. And that was one of the best times for us to connect, but it was also a really great time for us to pray. And we have been praying for our kids' entire lives, not just for them, but for their future spouse. If God's calling them to get married, we're praying that future husband, that future wife will fall in love with him, will be the right spouse that they need them to be, and that they would become the person that this, young woman or young man will need as well. So praying for your kids and letting him guide you in every way. There's lots of great books out there. I can recommend a bunch. Certainly it will give you great ideas, but the best thing to do is to learn to hear God's heart for your kid. That's the other thing that's interesting. Every child is different. And even in your own home, if you have more than one, you cannot we didn't have the same rules for Caleb that we had for Trevi. They didn't work that way. And what would be detrimental to Caleb was exactly what Trevi needed, and vice versa. All right, number 4. I can't remember who even said this, but this was a game changer. Say yes to spending time with your teenager anytime they ask. And this is a weird one, right? Because, again, they get to that age, they want to be with their friends, and we'd say, hey, we're going out to dinner. They would not want to go. Sometimes we'd just go without them, and it was kind of a bonus date. Or because they had homework, or they needed to talk to their friend, or whatever. And sometimes we didn't make them do that. And that's one thing I do wish, and I think Deborah would agree, I do think we let go of dinner time way too soon. And I think we gave them a phone way too soon and gave them access to more of that phone than they should have way too soon. Charging it in the living room or charging it in our room. But man, those things have apps that measure your sleep, that wake you up. It's so easily sucked into their life. But here's when saying yes to spending time with your kid, anytime they ask, because they're no longer as willing to go to the movies with you or to go on a walk with you or do anything with you. When Trevi would say something like, Mom, would you come take pictures of me? It inevitably was right when we sat down to watch something and Deborah's been exhausted from working all day. But we remember that advice. Deborah would get up and they'd go and they'd drive off. And it was during that drive that Trevi would open up about something that's going on in her life. And it was never, Mom, I need to talk to you about something going on in my life. It was, come take pictures of me, or Caleb asking, can I drive? And during that, we might have, it's weird. We're looking this direction, but the mouth is somehow works more in those moments, right? But in that season, get to know what your teenager enjoys. Oh, this is kind of a very funny thought, but when our kids started getting into things that weren't always our favorite, if we became aware of it and talked about it as if it was really cool, suddenly it was no longer as cool, right? They were not as nearly as interested, right, at whatever the band was or whatever the show was, or let's watch that show together. And that's one of the things too that, whether it's date nights, daddy-daughter dates, or family time, hangout time, that's been a really, really fun thing for us, is in those moments, just trying to get to know what the kids like and be there when they're ready for those kind of open conversations. All right, number 5, help them to learn how to spend time with God. Now, when they were growing up, reading to them from the scriptures, usually like little Bible stories from these, special books, that help written for kids. We had the Action Bible that the kids really liked there for a season in their tweens. But man, I will never forget the last night I read to Trevi. The last night, I think she was about 12 or 13. I don't remember the age, but I remember the moment. And she didn't say, "You're no longer needed. Thank you for your services." But it was less and less often. But I remember reading to her that night. She was not very interested, and certainly praying with her before bed and thinking, I don't think she wants this anymore. I think it's now doing more harm than good. Because there are times where I think that we would talk so much about Jesus that then anything but Jesus. So that's why getting to know what they like and being involved in their lives, and then helping them see how faith interacts with all of life is really important. And so, our kids, one thing that's really, I suppose this is a good thing, both kids struggle with anxiety. So they're very quick to ask us to pray for them, right? And so we've allowed that to be a really great way to stay connected with God, even in those weird years. I remember Trevi had some friends over and there was a tornado warning, and, they were looking up online how to survive a tornado, and the 3 little girls were in the tub, at 12 years old, and wanted a mattress on top of them. And we got to pray with Trevi and her 2 friends who don't go to church, and eventually one of those girls that was at our house that night, her mom started coming to our church and is now following Jesus. And so looking for natural times to spend time with God, whether it's on our walk, sometimes the kids will be with us on a walk and we'll just say, hey, how about I pray a little bit? And then we'll just pray for whatever we know is on the kids' hearts. And that way they feel like we're sharing their burden, but also we're teaching them that you can go to God anytime. We'll pray. Trevi will say something like, pray for me, I got a big test today. And okay, great, I'll do it right now. We'll just pray, just praying while driving or hiking or on a walk. And then over dinner, sharing what God's teaching me, not in a teaching them all the time mode, but more like, this is what I'm learning. And like I said earlier, when I was going through recovery, I would just sit the kids down, separately, or we'd be talking and I'd say, what, I've been learning this week. I really am easily triggered when ... happens. And I am so sorry. Sometimes you've gotten caught in that. It had nothing to do with you. It was more like a memory from the past that's kind of come back to haunt me, and just sharing what God has been teaching me. Sometimes during our family movie nights, we kind of, after it was over, we debrief. I didn't call it debrief, but I would say, so what was your favorite moment? Or what did you think when that character did that? What did you think about this when that character did this? And, it's really interesting because, it's been fun to see our kids kind of buck against whatever we say, just because we said it, to them now helping others see things from God's perspective and talking about their friends. We watched the TV show The Chosen together. That's the one thing we always watch, The Chosen. And these have been really, I think, helpful things that have kept us, even when those years felt a little lean and disconnected from God, of staying connected in their lives and helping them stay connected with God. And I mentioned that earlier, but limiting screen time, that's one of the biggest mistakes I think we made. We bought the phone at the right age because they both started riding the bus to school, and we lived close to downtown, and they were crossing the river. And so it felt like the right time to give them a phone, but I think we just let them plug it in their room too soon. And I think, limiting that time, because they are being discipled by whatever's on the other side, YouTube, Instagram, all those things. And so that, I think, is a really important thing. John Burke said this a few months ago, and it was really a great, I think, barometer. But he basically talked about, in terms of watching the news or listening to the news, try to spend as much time with God as you take in the news. And that'll either reduce how much time you spend on the news or increase the time you spend with God. Instead of 30 minutes on the ride home listening to, all the bad news that's happening in the world, maybe listen to a message, listen to Christian music and worship the Lord. And the same could be true with the kids, trying to, as much time as I'm going to let you on the screen, with whatever freedom you feel comfortable in your family, that's how much time you're going to spend as a family, or that's how much time we're going to spend, working on this or that. Number 6, have hard conversations sooner than later, and keep having them in different ways. So whether it's sex outside of marriage, alcohol, drugs, I always loved the way Deborah, when the kids were little, would talk in these kind of ways. When the kids would say something wrong or do something bad, she would say, "That's not who we are." So it was never a, "You are a liar." It was always a, "Lying is not who you are." Ultimately, your goal is to help them find their identity in Christ. And the world is trying to get them to put their identity in all sorts of other things. Sexuality, music, what others think of them, all of that stuff. But it started with, "That's not who we are." It turned into, "That's not God's best for us." It turned into, "This is what I learned from my mistakes. I care for you, and I want you to experience the same pain I experienced." And then it moved into, "This is what scientists say." This is what sociologists say. Just this week, we watched the Friends reunion. And we didn't watch that show much. It came out right as we were newlyweds, and we were up in Seattle, and for some reason it just didn't catch our attention. But I looked it up. The 6 characters slept with 120 people over the course of those 10 seasons, which is a lot of people, right? And really, what's happened in our culture, it's no longer waiting till marriage to have sex. It's literally, you don't even date until after you have sex. It's completely reversed. And there's a lot of damage that comes with that. And so to be able to say, that's not who we are, that's not what's best for us, that's not what God would want for us, but also this hurts us. And look what sociologists say. So there's an article I just happened to find this week, that millennials have realized, basically they're making, if you want a long-lasting marriage, don't live together first. Basically is what sociologists have said, right? So it's not just, it's proving what the Bible said a long, long time ago, right? Key to all this is knowing when to listen and knowing when to discuss. And always try to ask more questions than give answers. That's really tricky. But so what do you think would be better? And what would you do if you could make this decision? Whatever they're going through, just you're trying to, in this season, I'll give them as much freedom as you can so that they can make mistakes while they're in the house. At the same time, you want to protect them from making any mistakes that could actually, affect their future in such a negative way. So it's this really weird balance. With our daughter, she had a curfew and she often missed it. And that was one of the areas that we weren't quite on the same page on, what time her curfew should be and what should happen if she's late. And so when we're not consistent, it's easy for her to blow it. And is she following mom's rules or dad's rules? Is she really being disobedient, or is she just doing what she talked about with her mom? And she's smart. Our daughter is smart. Your kids are too. They will know how to get what they want by going to the right person. Or what Trevi would do, and I don't even know if this was intentional or subconscious, but she would treat her mom disrespectfully. I would jump in to rescue mom, and she didn't need me to rescue her, but I was triggered by how she was treating her. I would jump in, and Trevi would say something to me, which would make me so fired up that then I'm in trouble from my wife. And in the end, I'm the bad guy, and Trevi just sneaks off to the other room while we're in this big argument. But it was a triangulation, and part of what I learned in recovery was Deborah's not asking me for help. And just because I'm triggered doesn't mean I have to do anything about it. But in that season, never give up on them. It's better that they make mistakes while they're living with you than later. Be willing to let them be wrong. You still love them. Raise them to be part of the solution for their own problems and to help others with their problems.